everyone. I think we're going to wait just a couple minutes because I'm actually on time today. Smug face. This is what happens when you set up at 9 a.m. for noon and not at 11:30 for noon. So, just let me know if you can hear me, if everything sounds okay, so I can adjust all of that if necessary. And hopefully you won't hear my computer in the background so much this time. I tried to fix that. That was very loud. I'm sorry. Oh yes, and be sure to refresh your screen. There is a delay. I think that might be part of it. Sweet. Yay. Sorry, if you see me looking off this way, that's because my iPad is in that direction so I can see the comments. Is one of my solutions for letting you not hear my computer fan going like the last video. It was very, very loud. White noise stop. Is it like a constant humming or is it just when I'm speaking? Interesting. Can you hear a clock ticking? I forgot to take that out of the room. I'm not sure what the white noise is, but I will look into that and hopefully fix that for next time. Hopefully it's not overwhelming and you can still hear me. Okay. Alright, well I'm just going to get started. We're about 4 minutes in. The replays are available, so you can always re-watch them if you're coming in late. It's sort of not helpful, because if you're not here, you're not hearing me say that. Anyway, alright, so today we're going to talk about dealing with some materials, including the thrilling conclusion of what happened when I pre-shrunk my wool in my dryer. I know you were all waiting for that one. So when I asked earlier this week about what kinds of questions people had, pre-treating wool was a big one, and working with napped fabrics was another one, and I already had that one on my list. There were a couple questions about linings that I think I'm going to save for a couple weeks from now when we have Hoods and Linings week. I might talk a little bit about that at the end, but I think I'm going to save most of that for when we get there. So I'm going to change my screen so that you can see what I'm looking at, and I'm going to explain what I did with the dryer yesterday. and how it turned out and how much I cried. So, some things might be a little bit backwards for you guys, but I'm gonna try and maybe accommodate for that. So I had a half a yard of this raspberry wool velvet that I decided to sacrifice and see what would happen if I put it in the dryer to pre-steam shrink it. And I'll talk about some other ways that you can pre-shrink your wool as well. But I feel like doing it in your dryer is potentially the easiest way to do it on your own, at home, and not spend a ton of money on it. So I'll talk about those methods later, and I will start with what I did. So I cut it in half. This is a half a yard that I cut in half, so now I essentially have 2 flat quarters because I did 2 things. And I have a fancy dryer that has a built-in steam function, so if you have a fancy dryer that can do that too, then you can try this as well. If you don't, I also tried a method that is more approachable. If you don't have a fancy dryer or you have to use communal laundry in your building or go to the laundromat or whatever. So I have 2 fat quarters, and I drew a 12-inch square box on each swatch so that I would know, I would have something to gauge shrink against, so I would know how much it shrank. You don't have to do it with Sharpie. I did it with Sharpie for the sake of the experiment, just so I could easily show you. You can also just use a swatch and measure your swatch, and then probably write down what the measurements were so you don't forget. So I did not cry. It actually worked really well, and this wool velvet got even softer in the dryer, which was amazing. So the steam function on my machine, there's a container that you fill with water, and then there's a couple of different steam settings. I used one called Steam Sanitary because it was the longest and it ran on hot. And its purpose is for sanitizing things that you can't necessarily wash, like a comforter, or like if you have a bunch of baby clothes or something that needs to sort of be treated. I don't know why you can't wash baby clothes, but that was the example in the instruction manual. The instruction manual also specifically said not to use this setting with wool. I did it anyway. And what I found was, when I took this out of the dryer, it was not wet, and it shrank parallel to the selvage about 1/2 inch, and along the cross grain about 3/8 of an inch. And you can tell that it shrank. Like it feels a little bit thicker and a little bit denser. The other method that anyone can do is to use a wet towel in your dryer. And you want it to be wet, but not dripping. So somewhere between damp and dripping. It's very scientific. Not really. And you put the wet towel in your dryer and your wool, and you put it on high for 40 minutes. And I did that, and the wool was not wet. If your wool is wet, you need to let it dry, or you need to steam press it with your iron to dry it. And it didn't shrink. Actually, this looks like it shrunk a little bit. Like 1/8 of an inch, little bit. Not like 1/4 of an inch, a little bit. And parallel to the selvage, it did not shrink at all. So I don't know if that's because my dryer doesn't really get hot enough, or the towel wasn't wet enough, or if there was something in there. So if anyone tries that method, let me know how it works, because I really want to know. Even if it's like 3 months from now, I would be interested. Just shoot me a DM or something and be like, tried it. Um, or maybe it was just because it was this little piece. I don't know. But I did throw my full yardage into the steam function, and I have no regrets. So you can steam shrink your own wool in your dryer at home. I might try throwing this one in again with another towel and seeing what happens. Or I might try running it a little bit longer. I'll probably run it a little bit longer, like 50 or 60 minutes instead, and see what happens. The other ways that you can steam shrink your wool before you use it are taking it to the dry cleaners and asking them to steam press your yardage flat. You don't want any creases in it. If you have a local dry cleaners that you want to support during COVID times, this might be a good idea. Or if you have things that you're bringing to the dry cleaners anyway, it might be a good idea. But it tends to be expensive, just FYI. There are a couple of other methods. One is called the London shrink method, and that is where you lay out damp towels and roll your yardage in it. And I've heard sort of mixed reviews on how well this works, but you kind of need a lot of space, and you also need other people to not be disturbing your rolled up fabric, or animals disturbing your rolled up fabric for a few days, because you just kind of need to leave it there for like 2 or 3 days rolled up, and then you steam press it after that. The other method, and I was told about this one from, I guess I should move my camera so maybe you're looking at me. Hey guys. The other method that was told to me by a tailoring teacher was to put your wool yardage in a plastic trash bag with a damp towel, and again, leave it for a few days. I have not tried that. Apparently the plastic bag in combination with the damp towel will create steam and a little bit of heat that will shrink your fabric. If anyone tries any of those methods, please let me know. I have not. Using the steam function on my dryer is really convenient and easy, and it seemed to work, so I'm probably going to just stick with that. You don't need to steam shrink your wool if you're not planning on washing it. So for like a cloak, it might be less of a big deal than if you're making like a wool garment that is more fitted, where if it shrinks a little bit when you wash it after it's made, that might pose a problem. For the cloak, if it shrinks a little bit, it might not be that big of a deal. You might not even notice, especially if it's just like a little 1/2 inch in each direction. But again, that's 1/2 inch on 12 inches. So it'll probably shrink more with bigger pieces. So if anyone else has any fun ways that they have pre-shrunk their wool, you can also just do it with your iron, which sounds extremely tedious and very time consuming. But if you are into that, then by all means go for it. I can see how it might be kind of meditative, like one of those repetitive meditative jobs. But you will need a lot of steam, you will need a wet press cloth, and you will need room and space to be able to get all of your yardage over your ironing board or an ironing table if you have one. And I will probably be making a more formal video about my dryer process, because I did take some video as I was doing both methods, so that will be coming sometime in the near future. It'll be a bit of a rough video, but it'll be a little bit more of a step-by-step kind of a thing than what I've gone through here. So I'm going to check on the comments for a second. So you would want to, I'm sorry about the background noise, guys. Hopefully you can still hear me. I'm gonna look into it, since there's more than one of you who are telling me that there's background noise when I'm talking. Yeah. Oh yay, the color of the fabric is showing up well. That makes me happy. So you want to pre-shrink your wool, because if you're planning on like any other fabric, you want to pre-shrink it so that it doesn't shrink after you've made up what you've made. That was a little redundant. Anyway, when I was doing research for how to do this method, I found all the different methods I mentioned, but I also found people commenting that they took their wool to be pre-steamed at the dry cleaners, and then when they took their garment back to the dry cleaners to have the garment cleaned, they were specifically talking about pants. Their pants had shrunk. I think it was more of a length thing, like they just kept getting shorter because wool does it. Because of the nature of wool, because it's like kind of curly, it kind of expands and contracts a little bit, which can be helpful if you're doing something like tailoring. You can use steam to manipulate the fabric really well, but you don't want it to shrink after, so you want to pre-treat it to get at least most of that shrinkage out before you use it. What else? You could use a steamer. If you have a steamer at home, like a handheld steamer, like a Jiffy Steam, or I don't know who else makes them. I'm used to the Jiffy Steam ones. You can use that as well and just steam the heck out of it. And like pre-treating any fabric, you're probably going to want to choose a method that is slightly more intense than what you are planning to do with that, than how you are planning to clean it afterwards. Like a lot of people will wash their linen, like shifts and garments like linen yardage on hot multiple times before they make something out of it, even if they're not going to wash it on hot after they've made a garment. I don't wash most of my things on hot unless it's like towels or something that needs some sort of sanitary reasons, but garments I tend not to wash on hot because there really isn't a reason to, especially when we only wear garments once or twice before washing them like today. Historically, that was probably not the case. If you're planning on spot cleaning your wool, you probably don't need to pre-shrink it. It's probably not going to make that big of a difference, but if you want to be able to wash it afterwards, either by hand or taking it to the dry cleaners, you probably want to do something with it. Hopefully that wasn't super rambly. I apologize if it was. Alright, so the other thing that I was going to talk about today was dealing with napped fabrics, and more specifically how you press them, because I feel like that's always a big question. Like, what do you do so that you don't crush your fabric? So I'm going to move my camera again, and I'm going to show you some samples and how I deal with some stuff. Let's see. Right. So I have some swatches of the cotton velvet. Hopefully you can see them. But how I deal with cutting napped or piled fabrics is marking the direction of the nap, in which you can see with my tape with my arrows. And when I cut my 40s cloak, when I cut my 40s cloak, I will probably lay it out, and then I will double, triple, quadruple check which way the nap is going. The pattern recommends that it goes up. So if you are brushing upwards, it feels really soft. And if you run your hand downwards, it's going to feel more rough. So I'm going to mark the direction with, I use this purple tape. See if you can see it. I use this purple tape. It's kind of like blue tape. It's next to the blue tape in the tape aisle at Home Depot, and it is specifically a gentle, low adhesive tape that I think is specifically meant for paper, so that you don't tear paper. But it's just pretty. You can use blue tape, you can use masking tape. I just use this because I have it, because I thought it was pretty and would be useful. So the direction of my arrows are the direction that it is softest for this experiment. And I have a few examples, and I've also pre-stitched them. Hopefully you can see my stitching. I used top stitching threads that was a little more clear. I'm not sure if, back up, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I used my tape to mark the direction of my nap, whichever direction I am looking for. I might label it with words as well, just so I know. And I will lay my fabric out, and I will put a piece of tape probably on the edge so that I know, and as I trace off my pieces onto my fabric, I will put a piece of tape on each piece so that when I go to sew them, I know that A, I cut them correctly in the first place. If you tend to overthink things like I do, I will continue to second guess myself until the whole thing is constructed. And then when I match my pieces up, I know that they're all going in the proper direction. So I made these swatches making general assumptions based on my 1940s pattern. So when they're sewn together, the nap is running parallel. So both sides is soft going down, the nap is facing this way. And again, this one is, there's two that are in opposite directions because when I started sewing them, I realized that I had reversed the direction I had sewn it in relation to the direction of the nap, and I wasn't sure if that would make a huge difference. So I did a sampling just to see. So when I was sewing these, I started at this end and sewed this way, sort of against the nap or the pile, and then this one is with the pile. I'm not sure it really made a big difference. It might make a difference in how shifty it is, I'm not sure. But there are a few different ways that you can press this, and that was the point of making 4 of them. So I haven't tested this before. I'm going to test it live while you're watching me. We're going to just see what happens, and hopefully it's visible. So if I just press this like it's any other fabric, it's a normal seam. So I just woke my iron up. Press it closed, and now I'm going to press it open. And we're going to see what it does. It's not quite hot enough yet. It actually doesn't look too bad. Some things that I will say about cotton velvet versus silk velvet, it is much easier to handle and is far less shifty. Part of that is because it's cotton and not silk, which tends to be very slick, but also cotton velvet and velveteens in general tend to have a shorter pile. I don't have a piece of silk velvet, but maybe I'll dig one out after this so that I can show you the difference. But velveteen pile tends to be very short, like less than 1/8 of an inch. Alright. This is actually not crushing too poorly. I think you guys can see better than I can since I'm facing the window. There's a couple of like little funny spots. It's not crushing too poorly. And you can do all of these tests on your own as well to see what works with your specific fabric. This might not be too problematic just because of what it is, but if you're working with silk velvet, definitely test. So that was just straight on my ironing board, ironing it like it's any other thing. And I'm actually going to write that on here. My iron's actually on the wool setting and not the cotton setting because it tends to run kind of hot. There's a tool that you can get that is meant for ironing napped or piled fabrics called a needle board. I do not have one. They're kind of expensive. They kind of take up space in your room. And I just haven't gotten around to getting one. I think they're somewhere around $50 or $60. They're not terribly huge. They're sort of maybe 8 to 10 inches wide by maybe 18 inches long, approximately. They might come in different sizes, but I've used them in the costume shop that I've worked at, and sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not. So another handy trick is to get a scrap of your fabric and to use that as your pressing mat. So this sort of pile on pile helps protect. This is also really handy because it's not moving. It's holding itself in place really well. And I'm not using steam right now, and I'm not using a ton of pressure. I would say that that looks nicer. I feel like the seam allowance kind of pressed through on the one that was on my ironing board just a little bit, and I'm not getting that on this one. So I think that that is maybe a very handy solution. I might just save this extra piece that I have to use as my makeshift velvet board. So there's that one. I could probably use with a little bit of steam and maybe turn the heat up a little bit. Let's try that actually and see what happens. Because I am here to experiment with things and destroy things so that you don't have to. Is there a way to correct an impression or crushing? Sometimes it depends on what it is. You might be able to steam it out if it's just kind of a little bit. Like, I'll see if I can hard press some seam allowance into one of them and see if I can fix it. Another trick is to use a towel. I'm just using a little hand towel because that was more convenient because I'm doing these little pieces. Make sure you're using a towel that is plain and doesn't have like ribbing or like don't iron over the like the band, because that will leave an impression. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll try a few different ways to ruin my fabric. This is also something where you could probably experiment with the towel that you're using. Like, I was standing in front of my my linen cabinet trying to decide which towel I should use. So that one didn't crush. I feel like the steam kind of, maybe it's just me in the light, but I feel like I can kind of see the seam allowance a little bit through that one. No super hard, no hard crushes yet. I'm sorry, we got there. I'll take some close-up pictures too, and post them somewhere. I'm not sure yet, but I will post them somewhere so you can see. And the fourth technique I was going to show you comes from my 1940s pattern, which is this one. And I will read this to you because I had not thought of doing this. I'm not sure how well it would work, but we'll try it. So it says, for velvet, to press seams, stand a hot iron end up, right? With seams opened, hold material taut and rub seams over the edge of the iron until they are flat. To steam velvet, Place a wet cloth over an upright hot iron and pass wrong side of velvet over the steaming press cloth, lightly brushing up the nap at the same time. I feel like this sounds like a really great way to burn yourself, especially considering that this cloak is somewhere between, I think it's like 40 and 45 inches long or something. So trying to press that much fabric on an upright iron seems precarious, but we'll try it. So here's my iron, making sure you guys can see it. And here's my fourth sample. So we'll open it up, kind of finger press the seams. This might work better with this more vintage iron that is probably heavier than mine is. When you saw me running my fingers along it, you might want to make sure you're doing that in the direction of the nap. I would say that worked. Not sure I will actually use that method, but an option, especially if you have an older iron that is maybe a little bit more stable sitting up like that. Mine was kind of sliding away from me because it's not particularly heavy. All right, let's see if we can crush some fabric. Let's see. There is a technique that we were shown in fashion school, and it only works with like a silk rayon velvet, where you can, where you can actually make your own kind of burnout patterns using a rubber stamp and your iron. It was kind of cool. So, let's see. I definitely have some showing of the seam allowances through. I was kind of pushing down on it and leaving it there for a long time. So we'll see if let's see if we can fix it now. I'm gonna lay the towel down. So velvet boards, maybe eBay for a reasonable priced one. That's a good tip. I hadn't thought of looking on eBay, but that's a good idea. Or even maybe checking Marketplace to see if you live somewhere where there's some fashion industry, there might be some factories getting rid of stuff. That's always a good idea. Using a round dowel cut in half lengthwise so you're only pressing the very seam. That's maybe the next thing I should try. I can talk to my significant other about buying dowels and cutting them in half for me. I'm sure he'll be thrilled. But that's something to try. I'm going to put that on my list and we'll see what happens. Alright, so I've kind of pressed the seam allowance. Is definitely showing. It's been hard pressed. Let's see if we can get it out. So I'm just kind of hovering my iron over and steaming it to start with. And I did that on the right side of the fabric, which is maybe not where I should have started. And that's not coming out that way. Might need a like a brush, like a clothing brush or a lint brush, where I can actually manipulate the pile a little bit better, which I also don't have one of those. That's better. So lots of steam on the back and then kind of brushing against the pile to sort of pick up those fibers. This would probably definitely work better, but with a brush. It's still sort of there, but I might need something to get in between. So that's a lot better just with steaming and brushing. I'm going to use this nice scrap piece of velvet here to sort of go in between the seam allowance and the velvet. So that when I lay it down and brush it, that line isn't underneath it. Let's see if that helps. I would say that helped a lot. So the solution, if you do wind up crushing your velvet, is going to be steaming it and brushing the nap back where it's supposed to go. I can see it a little bit, but I don't know if it'll show on the camera, the difference between the two sides. Another thing to keep in mind with velvet is your presser foot pressure, which can also crush and it can kind of leave lines like on either side of your seam from the presser foot. This one isn't too bad. Your tension might also need to be changed if you have like very fluffy fabric, especially. So play around, definitely do some sample sewing, sample pressing, sample steam shrinking. If you're buying wool velvet from me and you don't want to sacrifice pieces of your wool for doing dryer testing, just leave me a note in your order comments and I'll throw in a couple of swatches so you don't have to waste your yardage. But if you can swing it, buying an extra quarter or half a yard for doing all of these sort of tests is probably going to be worth it in the end, so that you don't have to get into your project and realize that something is not working, because that would be awful. All right. That is kind of what I had for today. I think I'm remembering everything. So if you guys have any questions or any hot tips or anything that you've tried, in my Instagram post today, I asked if anyone had any tips about working with velvet, and my friend Michelle from Clockwork Fairy said basting, which I think is a really great reminder, because basting can be, it's really tedious and time consuming, and I really avoided doing it for many, many years because I just didn't want to. Whether it was hand basting or machine basting, it didn't matter. I didn't want to do it. And so I learned the hard way that putting in that extra time and effort can really save you a lot of struggle later, especially if you're dealing with fabrics that don't like to behave. Really shifty silks, velvets, definitely based, and it will save you a lot of heartache later. So I'm going to see if you guys have anything else to say, and we'll finish up here. Next week, our theme is stitching, and I was maybe thinking that instead of doing a live where I just sort of blabber at you for half an hour, 45 minutes, that maybe we could do like a sewing circle style and have it be a Zoom call and be a little bit more, we can all be a little bit more interactive and sort of work on whether you're working on your cloak or you're working on something else, it doesn't matter. That's totally fine, but have it be a little bit more of an interactive sewing circle. So let me know if you would be down with that. I'll put it on social media and in the email too, and then I can send everyone the link. I just thought that might be a little bit more fun. So, I'm not seeing any more comments. I'll just wait. I can see if I can destroy this a little bit more. Maybe I can get an iron mark on here. You can see what kind of weird things I can come up with. Sounds fun. Awesome. Okay, great. I'm excited. I'm kind of excited to actually be able to talk to all of you. Ooh. It's a good iron mark. Funny tidbit. My boyfriend is a musician and he has this really large bass amp. And he had it in college, and apparently his roommates used it as an ironing board. Because they're boys who don't sew, I guess. And so the top of the bass amp has this giant, just like full-on iron mark on the top of it. And it makes me laugh every single time because I'm like, oh man, you really got those corners really well. That bass amp got pressed excellently. It just makes me laugh. So, all right, we will do a sewing circle next week, and I'm happy to sort of shift the time a little bit if it works better. You know, there's a few people who regularly tune in every week, so if something works better for actually sewing, just let me know and I'll see what I can do. Otherwise, same bat time, same bat channel next week, except we'll all get to talk to each other. I guess different bat channel. Same bat time, different bat channel. And we'll all get to talk to each other, which will be really fun, for me especially. So, thank you for joining me. Send me your questions if you have them. You can leave them in the comments. You can DM me on Instagram or send me an email through the website. And I will see you next week.